All right. So what's up, everybody? Dr. D here. Hope everybody's doing good. I'm here with my brother from another mother. I'm kidding. Ryan Smith. So we've been working together and getting closer and closer as these last couple of years has gone by. And he's really one of the very few people that I get on the phone all the time when I have questions. Ryan. Hey, Ryan, email. So Ryan's such a stud and so educated and well-rounded in many senses. Ryan, I know you have a very long laundry list of accolades, but if you could just give us a little bit of an introduction and of who you are, what you do, and your passion in life.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, my journey to this space has been a little bit convoluted to say the least. It started with sort of a biochemistry background, then went to medical school, but absolutely hated it. Quite frankly, I was seeing a lot of sick patients, people I didn't think I was actually helping. So I made the pretty stupid financial decision to quit and instead created a compounding pharmacy called Tailor Made Compounding, and that's really where I was introduced to the integrated medical space, this preventive medical space, but it's also where I was able to use some of my previous experience with particularly, creating and synthesizing peptides and proteins to be able to build what I would say awareness of sort of these peptide pharmaceuticals. And so that was a really quick and fast growing business. We were the fourth fastest growing company in healthcare, and got to learn and meet a lot of really great physicians all around the world and learn from them in a lot of different aspects. But one of the things we always looked for was ways to objectively validate how these things were working. And so toward the end of that experience at TaylorMade, I got really interested in this idea of other new and innovative testing techniques. And that brought me to this idea of epigenetic testing, which is, so we exited the pharmacy in 2020 and created True Diagnostic, which is where I'm at now.
Awesome. And this guy's not just an entrepreneur. He is really a scientist at heart. Like, he knows his stuff. You ask him a question, he'll send an article immediately right after with the answer he just said. So, and again, another person having gone to medical school, etc. We appreciate having this kind of conversation, because every space nowadays you see a lot of innovation, even in our financial space now, with people, with the cryptocurrencies and blockchain and so forth, and innovation, I feel it's always been part of humanity, but it's really strong right now. And when you're a young doctor, young scientist, and you're trying to think outside the box, it's really interesting, where you work with somebody that's always on the top breadth of science, sending you articles, looking at, the latest and greatest science around the world, even, right? And, German medicine, Russian medicine, etc. Really interesting. So, all right, so let's dive into it, Ryan. Hot topic nowadays is longevity, performance. At least here for us at Biohacks, is very hot. And one I heard this the other day. Can't remember from who, but somebody in the scientific realm said something to me that we're either the last, we're the last civilization to die, or the first one to live forever, something like that. Yeah, basically saying, like, it's really advancing, like the regenerative medicine space. And this person I can quote, Dr. Giampapa, a friend of both of ours, Nobel Prize nominee 2014, first president of the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine, A4M. In his book, he says that the regenerative medicine is actually doubling every 2 years that goes by. The amount of information doubles, right? Woohoo for us. That's a lot more studying, right? So what's your thoughts on that? And then on the longevity side, I mean, what do you see with age and longevity? I mean, performance and longevity and correlation of those two, right? So basically, performance, longevity, because people think it's a separate thing. I'm like, You're either breaking yourself down, you're either in a destructive state or a constructive state. And the age and longevity go to, longevity and performance go together, right? So give me some of your thoughts on that, brother.
Yeah, absolutely. So they've got this thing now, this sort of idea, this longevity escape velocity, which is, are we going to anti-age, enough to sort of, change our lifespans to really live a long time or live forever? I wish that were the case. I'm a little bit more skeptical probably than most about our ability to do that, but there's no doubt in my mind that we can reverse the aging process or slow the aging process, especially in those people who have been damaged. And so I'm not going to say we're going to live forever, but we're going to live, a long time. We're going to live a lot healthier for a long time. And so I think that brings up this idea of, people think about longevity. They think, I don't want to live till I'm 120. I don't want to live till I'm 130. Can you imagine that quality of life? But it brings back what you're saying, right? This whole idea of performance and sort of this idea of aging. It's not just about how long you're going to live. Aging is the biggest risk factor for every chronic disease and death, right? So it is, if you can think of a chronic disease, cancer, cardiovascular disease, stroke, heart attack, Parkinson's, osteoarthritis, right? Even just moving from a day-to-day basis, all of these things, their number one risk factor is how old you are. There's a reason we don't see people in our 30s or 20s with the same amounts of disease we see in our 60s. And so age itself, I think, hopefully people will start changing their concept and think of it as a disease, because what we know is when we can change this, we can make massive impacts. The thing that we measure is biological age, so not your chronological age, but the age of your body. And if everyone in the world were to reverse that by just 7 years, we could cut disease in half. 50% of people would no longer be sick. Even if you look at the economic impact, and this is why it's getting so much funding now. This is why people are so excited about it, because even if you just increase the longevity by 1 year, the average lifespan by 1 year, it would have over $260 billion worth of benefit to the U.S. economy. And so these things are big topics, and the problem has always been, again, how do we measure aging? Like what do we want? And so to talk about that, again, aging is absolutely related to how you look and feel. It is not just about the diseases you're going to get or how long you're going to live. And so if you're improving your aging, you're probably going to be performing better in all aspects of your life.
Oh, love it, love it, love it. Especially with those statistics. Yeah, the 7 year reversal of that epigenetic age and impact on 50% of disease. I mean, and then impact on our country's finances. That's very, very important that people start understanding that a little bit better, right? So why don't we get into a little bit on how we actually measure aging, because it doesn't matter really how many birthdays you've had, how many times you sing happy birthday. You actually have there's another marker there that's really important, and we're getting better and better, or you are getting better and better at this stuff. Thank you. And for those of us that are, those of you that are clients here and so forth, yeah, I really take my hats off to this guy, genuinely speaking. So let us know a little bit, because a lot of times it's like people are like, oh, we're calculating telomeres, and it's like, yeah. So I don't know. I know you have a little bit of a presentation that maybe you could share with us on how that,
Yeah.
if you prefer to go that way, but I think the presentation would be probably better if you want to do that.
Absolutely. And I'll pull it up now, but to sort of go through this, I'll talk about some of these other things about, like, how long do you think you age, or really how long do you want to live? But it goes to this idea, as what we mentioned earlier, with this difference between health span and lifespan, right? No one wants to live longer just to be sick for the majority of their life. And so, whenever we talk about these ways to mitigate age, we're not just talking about how long you live or how good you feel. And we'll go over some of those things generally, but the idea has always been, how do you quantify age, right? And everyone has been sort of talking about, chronological age is a good example, right? Everyone knows people in their 70s who look like they're in their 50s, and everyone knows people in their 50s who look like they're in their 70s. And so we've known forever that even though chronological age is the biggest risk factor for every chronic disease and death, it is still not the best measurement, right? There are better ways to sort of look at how someone's feeling and behaving in order to determine sort of their age of their body, and therefore their risk for death. And so, a long time ago, they decided that they were going to create these criteria for how to measure biological age. And you can read them here, but I won't belabor the point. Generally, even in the 1930s, they were telling you the age of your body by your chronological age plus every one, pack per year you smoked. So if you smoked one pack a day, you'd be essentially 1 year older biologically. And those were really, really crude measurements. But really, in since then, even things like telomeres have come out, where, telomeres, for instance, are those end caps of your DNA, which gets shorter as we age, but it's not that predictive of disease. It's not that, I would say, correlated with aging. And so until 2013, there really wasn't a marker that existed that was able to really do that. And for the first time now, we have a marker, and it's this idea of what we call epigenetic clocks. And if there's one thing to take away, I would say, from this entire conversation, it is not that it's not these epigenetic clocks. It's epigenetics as a platform. And we can talk about what that is, and I definitely have some slides on that as well. But this idea of epigenetics, or sort of what we can read about what DNA is turned on or turned off, will impact every area of medicine over the next 10 to 15 years. It's anticipated to overtake even traditional blood testing over that time. And so this is going to be something you see in every area of practice, and it's absolutely something you can apply to your health. And so these epigenetic clocks have become a new way to essentially diagnose the age of an individual, and then implement change to see actually what reverses that clock. Because again, if we can reverse our clocks, we can reverse our risk. And so this is really, what Dr. D, obviously you all are using a lot of this in clinic to see what's working in your patients. And generally, we're seeing, pretty good results. And so I think that this idea of a new and accurate way to measure your age is really, really exciting. And so in order to go into what we're actually measuring, it's important to talk about what this epigenetic methylation measurement is. And so really, I always explain this by saying every cell in your body has the exact same DNA sequence, right? If we took your hair cells or your saliva, we'd get the exact same DNA sequence. But those cell types behave very, very differently. The cells in your heart are very different than the cells in your liver. And that is because of what genes are turned on and turned off. And they're turned on and turned off by these epigenetic mechanisms. So you have little chemical tags on your DNA which says, hey, this needs to be turned on or this needs to be turned off. And so we almost call sort of this like a light switch in your DNA. And that's really what we're reading. Is we're not reading what your sequence of DNA is, but we're reading what's turned on and what's turned off. And that can give us a lot more insight. And in particular, the off switch is what we're measuring, which is DNA methylation. So we're measuring those little chemical tags that are on top of your DNA, which tells your body not to turn on that gene. And what we sort of found is that this is highly, highly linked to this idea of aging. We found patterns that have basically said, we can actually tell you how old you are chronologically in very, very accurate forms. And at first, that is how it was used. It was used to date, for instance, how old people were at a crime scene. It was used to date if refugees were over 18 or under 18 and therefore eligible for asylum, as they were fleeing from Syria. And so this has been, used in the larger world context for a long time, but it really didn't, I would say, go into this health context until we had these clocks, which were able to show us a lot about how we age. And again, I won't belabor the point of methylation for those people who are not necessarily interested in the science, but we're looking at these places called CPG islands. And the thing to note is that there are 29 million of these per cell, and every cell is different. And so this is a lot of data. This is as Dr. D sort of mentioned on the opener, the amount of data that we're generating is robust, and this is a data set we've never seen before.
And that's funny, because I was gonna ask you to talk a little bit about methylation and so forth, but you just went straight into it, because it's such such a topic, because the way I'm about simplifying all this stuff, because like all these, like this is great, but even for me sometimes these slides get scary, because it's like, Jesus, right? And when you get all these, I'm like, okay, I gotta break this down, and I always tell everybody, I'm not the smartest tool in the shed, never was. So I got to do all these little analogies and so forth. For one thing, I always say, and if this sounds very foreign, just think of it this way, Ryan. Let me know if you'll agree with this analogy. There's a piano, there's a pianist. The piano's your DNA, your genes, right? And the pianist is the epigenetic environment, and you actually pick which ones you're going to turn on. So and that's exactly what I think Ryan was talking about. And methylation and so forth plays a huge role, or it actually is kind of the process of playing that piano. Now, your environment is going to play a major role in what you're going to turn on and turn off. Just because you have the BRCA gene, right, for breast cancer doesn't mean you have to express it, right? But now there's things that are going to turn it on, and there's things that are going to turn it off. For example, diindole methane, which is found in cruciferous vegetables, which is very, very good and protective towards breast cancer and so forth, right? And then you can for many other things, but I don't want to lose our place and get into a new topic. But just so people understand really what this is. And it's like, okay, but what's the whole point of this? Well, because you can take a little bit more control of your health through data, right?
Exactly right. I think that's the beauty of it, is that this is something that's changeable, and it's not just changeable, from drugs. It's not just changeable from supplements. It's changeable from diet, lifestyle, nutrition. It is everything in your life. I mean, we can even look at these epigenetic signatures and see how much you've drank across a lifetime, how much you've smoked, how much mercury or lead you've been exposed to. This methylome, what we can read here, is really, really robust because it can predict just about anything. We can actually even predict death. And so, but the idea is these things are changeable. And so it puts this sort of emphasis on your DNA back into your own hands and gives you a lot more control. So you can again control the music, right? Obviously, that's made in that analogy.
Right.
And yeah, and so again, not to get too crazy with it, but the idea here is that ultimately, at the end of the day, what we're able to do is tell you how old you are. But we're not just able to tell you how old your body is, we're also able to tell you how fast you're aging right at this moment. And what that allows us to do is to treat aging for the first time in a very objective way. Dr. D and I might both take a particular medication. His aging rate might go up, mine might go down. But now we can
Right.
actually see that on a personalized and individual basis. We can see what works for us, and that allows us to really approach this idea of aging with a really good and useful tool.
Yep, absolutely. And aging, I tell people aging is the ultimate disease. And now you hear a new term, inflammaging, right? Because people, inflammation, and then aging. No, it's the, I don't know who coined this term. Maybe you do, but I like that term, and whoever coined it, I've been using it a lot. So like, um, but aging is the ultimate disease because it's almost like the attractor to everything. It's the wear and tear of just you as a person. So now, as we look into aging and performance, right? I always like to correlate a little bit performance. They're not two separate things, right? It's like I say, you're in a either constructive or destructive state, right? So um, now, Ryan, if we can get into a little bit actually, because the like I said, sometimes people ask us, oh, is this the measurement of telomeres, or if we can get into the parameters, and I know we use like a Yale protocol, et cetera. So if we can get into how actually like the latest and greatest of how we actually measure these epigenetic clocks, how do they work?
Yeah. So hopefully, if you can see the slide, it's a good example of sort of where people stand on telomeres now, which is that they're absolutely linked to age, but they're generally not as predictive as the measurements we're using now, which
Mhm.
are very, very predictive of these health outcomes. And so I always like to show this because, again, people associate, I think, telomere length as a good biomarker of age, and it is a biomarker of age, but it's not the best. What is the best now are definitely these epigenetic clocks. And so what we're actually measuring is the pattern, I would say, of those clocks, right? So what we're measuring is the actual methylation on your DNA, and we're measuring 900,000 locations, and at each location we're getting a number between 0 and 1, right? We're getting a percentage, and really that data by itself would be absolutely useless. If that's the only data we had, it wouldn't be very helpful. But what we've done now in the advent of computer learning and artificial intelligence, we're able to create algorithms which are able to predict certain types of outcomes. And so the algorithms and outcomes we're looking at now are things like, how you're aging, right? What are your disease rates or risk? When are you likely to die? And with that, what we can see is that generally people who are older than their chronological age with these clocks are at more risk for these outcomes. So, for instance, and I always like to mention cancer as a really good one. If you can see here on this, for anyone who is 1 year older biologically, so they're 1 year older than their chronological age. So if you're 40 and you get this test back and you're 41, you would increase your risk of developing cancer within the next 3 years by 6%, and you'd increase your risk of dying of cancer in the next 5 years by 17%. And so again, you can see those risks definitively increase if you're older than you should be, right? And that's what this biological age tool is for. Is it's connected not just to cancer, but every type of risk, every type of age-related disease. So we can actually tell you, how much this increases your risk of stroke or heart attack or peripheral artery disease or diabetes. All of these things are linked to age because age is the underlying factor for them all. And so that's what we're measuring, and then we can actually tell you how your age is changing these factors. And again, this goes into some of our typical types of reports, which again talk about all these age-related diseases. But to go a step further than that, Dr. G, I'd love to just talk about one of my favorite markers, which is this duty and pace of aging marker. This is what we developed with Duke and Columbia, and it tells you at this moment exactly how fast you're aging. And you can see here it tends to slowly go up over time, so it's harder to keep that rate of aging low. But even if you're slightly above one, if you're at 1.01, so you're aging 1.01 biological years per year, you'd increase your risk of death over the next 7 years by 56%, and you'd increase your risk for chronic disease diagnosis over the next 7 years by 54%. But the reason I like to pull out this one is because this one is absolutely connected to, I think, what you're mentioning, Dr. D, is all these performance-related markers, right? How is life worth living? And so we can actually see this. We've followed this group actually since the time in 1972, when they were 3 years old, now all the way up until now, when we released our last paper in the fall. And we can see here that, for instance, in terms of performance metrics, if you look on the bottom graph, you can see that as people have a faster rate of aging, their performance on this balance testing gets worse. We also see this with grip strength and muscle mass. If you want to keep on muscle mass, if you want to keep on athletic performance, aging is a factor that changes this. And so again, you can see here, the faster that you age, the worse your muscle mass and grip strength. We actually see this even. So go ahead.
I have a bunch of jiu-jitsu athletes, like a lot of them. That grip strength right here, I know. I actually mentioned that to one of them the other day. I'm like, and about this correlation here. They're like, really? I'm like, yeah. Okay, we gotta fix
Totally.
that.
Yeah, no, and yeah, not just grip strength, but all muscle mass, right? Even and obviously balance is important for any athlete too, and also cognitive, right? Cognitive, even how you approach everything mentally. We can actually see up to a 15 IQ point difference, and 15 IQ points is a big deal at age 45 from people who are aging at a rate of 2 versus aging at a rate of 1. And we don't just see this in IQ tests; we see it actually on the brain itself. But I think one of the easiest ways to talk about how aging impacts is even aesthetically. And so this is one of my favorite images to share too, because all of these people that you see here are the same chronological age. They're all age 45, and these are all actually composite images of real people. And so this is from our cohort. You can look at the people on the left. Those are the people who have the slowest aging rates, versus the people on the right, who are those people who have the fastest aging rates. And they look to be 30, maybe 20, 30 years apart. And even though they're the same chronological age, and that's because they probably are that far apart. Some of them had been aging at a rate of 1.6 years their entire life. Others have been aging at a rate of 0.6 years their entire life. So when they get to age 45, this is the difference, right? And so it goes to show you aging doesn't just, although we know it's tied to disease and longevity, it's also tied to all those things that people consider whenever they're thinking about quality of life, right? How you think, how you move, what you're able to do, and obviously how you look as well. And so I think that brings back to Dr. D's point, say, aging cannot be separated from really any part of life. And if you want to improve it, you should definitely focus on aging as a primary biomarker.
Oh, absolutely, man. It makes no sense nowadays to not take advantage of this, especially if you're, anybody. Anybody. Now that we talked about how we measure this, so we know it's a few different parameters, and this study's been going on for years, and as it goes on, and with, like you said, with artificial intelligence, et cetera, it's just it's 55 parameters, correct?
So it was based off 55 measurements. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, and it started in 1976.
Yes, 1972. But it really started in earnest about 3 years later. Yeah.
Right. So it's been going on and as artificial intelligence is also getting better, this is just going to get more and more precise, right? So
exactly.
And then this is proving a lot better than just measuring telomeres, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So now that we're actually getting more detail and data in measuring age, let's talk a little bit maybe about some implications, because everybody's like, okay, I got it.
Yeah.
Possible, Ryan, that you look crunch a lot more of this data. We just see our cohort here, which hasn't been bad, but do you see a lot of these clocks actually start reversing?
Yeah, we do, and unfortunately, I'm gonna shoot down people's dreams a little bit, which is that you're not going to see a decade of change in a couple days, right? That is not necessarily possible. But with that being said, we are seeing age reversals, and again, that's actually I think a good thing instead of a bad thing, because you wouldn't want a metric that is not real, right? And we also know that you can't you can't rejuvenate yourself back to a 15-year-old overnight,
A lot of
and so,
it's like, oh,
right.
going, am I gonna? And I'm like, no, it doesn't work that way.
Exactly. We wish, and maybe we'll get there one day. I think that there are some therapies which are really, really exciting. I mean, to point to that, to give people again some of that hope that I just took away. There are therapies right now that have taken these epigenetic ages and reversed them back to zero in cell studies and even in mouse trials. It's called this idea of these Yamanaka factors, where they reprogram cells, and whether you're interested in doing that or you're just interested in even business, it was the biggest startup of all time. The most well-funded startup of all time was announced right around 3 months ago, called Altos Labs, funded by Yuri Milner and Jeff Bezos, and they essentially are funding this idea of, hey, how do we reset these epigenetic age? How do we take cells and turn them back to pluripotent stem cells, in vitro, to reverse age? And so although I might say there's nothing now that will reverse you to the age of a 15-year-old, there might be eventually, and we're starting to already see animal applications. Dr. David Sinclair from Harvard used those same factors and restored vision to age-related blind mice. And so we know these things have some really big potential. And so as we're talking about that escape velocity of longevity that we mentioned, those are some of the things which are really exciting to fix it.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, and with when you start talking about these things, I get hope. I'm 37, maybe. So should I say I'm 72, and the therapy.
Exactly.
No, but yeah, so you mentioned some cool therapies that you can apply to these things, and let's maybe jump into a few of these. Like there's a trial I always like mentioning, the TRIM trial. I know it still needs, it was applied to nine individuals, and but it consists of a study applied to 9 individuals. They were able to extend their lifespan for 2 years. So TRIM stands for thymic regeneration, immuno restoration, and insulin mitigation, right? So those 3 strategies, right? I like to use that language a lot here. So what are our strategies? How are we going to accomplish this, right? One thing I'm obsessed with, I'll just drop it real quick, is the thymus gland. Very, very upset. Not thyroid, guys, not parathyroid. I'm not talking about here. It's right here, the middle of your chest, and it's involuting as you age. It's getting smaller. When you're a baby, it's really big, and as you're aging, it's getting small, very, very small. We won't talk so much about it, but right now, and actually, that probably deserves a podcast or a webinar itself. Very, very hot topic. But other things like insulin mitigation, immunorestoration, those are things that we do here. The immune system for us is so important. I mean, just inflammation, right? We just said inflammaging, right? Immunorestoration. See, the immune system is so important because one of a good way to die is when your immune system gets overwhelmed by some kind of disease or whatever it is, or chronic disease and so forth. So some ways to strengthen your immune system is actually, the first thing I tell people is avoid the darn toxicity. Get away from the environment. Again, and we get back into the epigenetic clocks. Now see how this thing all starts to connect. Epigenetic, the environment, right? Your epigenome, right? And that's where sometimes you're putting inside your body things like that are going to have a deleterious effect on you in the short term performance and long term longevity, such as the glutens and dairy products or whatever. But we always say that you should use personalized data to see what actually is really harming you or not, right? So lots of times the first strategy is removal of toxicity. That's something we always talk about before you get into any fancy, because everybody's like, what can I buy? What can I? It's like, no, just avoid first, right? And then, but Ryan, maybe we can jump into a few strategies. For example, going back to the TRIM trial, they used growth hormone, DHEA, and metformin. So, and metformin, if I had a penny for every time somebody asked me my thoughts on metformin, it's like, so What's your
Yeah.
take on that?
Well, so I'll say, first off, the trim trial had great results, and again, it was this whole idea of, hey, let's use growth hormone, this really powerful hormone to regenerate that thymus, but the side effects of that are going to be maybe some insulin sensitivity. So how do we go about reducing that? And so they obviously chose metformin and DHEA as a way to take away that major side effect, and the results they had were great. But I would also say that in our data sets, we I would say don't see that great of results necessarily with metformin, at least in terms of epigenetic aging. And so with that being said, we might prefer some other ways to mitigate that same risk. And DHEA is a good example. I think for DHEA we see some really amazing results with such a supplement essentially, where it can reverse age in a pretty big way by limiting the effects of stress, right? And that goes back, I think, to what you're talking about, which is the first thing you do is figure out what to take out of your life, right? Not necessarily what to put in. And I think that you can do it exogenously with DHEA, but going back to that idea of even just maintaining the immune system. We also know that, for instance, people who just take vitamin D at 4,000 IU per a week for 16 weeks can, on average, reverse your epigenetic age by 1.8 years. And that's crazy, right? If you can think of, we're talking about that 7-year age mark as a way to reverse 50% of your own risk for death and disease. If vitamin D just for 16 weeks can get you, 1.6 of years, that's pretty incredible. And so we know the immune system is important, and the immune system can target things like those senescent cells. But in our regard to metformin, I think that a lot of people hoped it would be the first anti-aging approved drug. They got the TAME trial, which is going on. But in our experience, I think that people have a lot of side effects. It doesn't have that big of an anti-aging effect in our data sets, and generally we'd prefer other things. I would say that might make a little bit more sense.
Right. So us here too, and there's things in like antioxidants that are really good that have a little bit of that hypoglycemic effect, like alpha lipoic acid, a mineral like chromium, which our soil has very little chromium nowadays, or with the agricultural revolutions we've had, first with the pesticides and the GMOs and so forth. Chromium, selenium, minerals, that's a whole big conversation right there. But very, very important to understand this point with lowering sugar. I pause here for a second because this computer's about to run out of battery.
No worries.
Huge. You can see everything around. But I want left me alone in the room. Anyhow.
Yeah. I've been there. But
yeah.
yeah.
Help the difficulty I'm having.
And for what it's worth, though, as you speak about minerals, an interesting thing that we're finding out now is that surprisingly, lithium, which has been used as sort of an antipsychotic medication for years, is a mineral which has been shown to reduce some biomarkers of aging, including epigenetic age and increased telomere length, as we talked about that too. So even something as low dose lithium supplementation from sort of a mineral standpoint might be positive.
Yeah. So insulin mitigation is a huge point, and then that again, you kind of got to bring in fasting, right? Fasting is, what's one of the, when you're fasting, you don't have those insulin spikes, and then ultimately, what's the big issue with it? With these insulins, that you turn on mTOR, right? mTOR truly is a very well, it's the pathway. That pathway is very linked to cancer and so forth. And mitigating insulin is very important for a plethora of reasons, but one can be that as well. Okay, so on that side, on the insulin mitigation, just to kind of wrap it up, there's something like alpha lipoic. And this is anyway, shape or form, any kind of medical advice. If you have any questions, go speak to your medical practitioner and have this conversation with him. But I see you brought something here on mTOR. What is this?
Yeah, definitely. I know it's always a joke because I should say a joke in the longevity community, because mTOR is so important for aging. And there's obviously mTOR inhibitors like rapamycin, where in all the clinical trials, animal trials, I should say, the lowest amount of lifespan extension was 9%. That's incredible. I give it to my dog, but it seems like every time we think we find a new anti-aging intervention, it always becomes mTOR, right? It all goes back to mTOR. And so as you're talking about fasting and some of those things, I just wanted to emphasize your point that mTOR is important.
That's funny. I actually listened to I'm gonna take that one. Then. But yeah, again, it boils down to that, which then leads me to the other point in the trim trial. They use the growth hormone, right? They use growth hormone, which is something interesting. Our physicians here don't prescribe this. I'm not a prescribing physician. Just for those of you getting to know me, I went to school. I have an MD, MBA, but I manage, and I'm board certified in alternative. Um, but our physicians here, we don't prescribe growth hormone. However, there seems to be some or very heavy data linking growth hormone levels to anti-aging effects or longevity effects. And again, in the trim trial, it was used to help regenerate the thymus gland. So, but then it caused the problem of the sugar. The sugar levels come up with the growth hormone, right? And thus the use of metformin. But if you want to provoke your growth hormone levels, for example, fasting, one of the main things of also that we saw in fasting, not only does it inhibit mTOR, but it increases growth hormone. So again, we didn't even, when we spoke about this before doing, Ryan, you and I, we didn't even say, hey, let's talk about fasting. But I mean, these things always end up coming right back up, right? It's the only proven way to really make a human live longer, correct?
Yeah, fasting and caloric restriction is indispensable. If there's one thing to recommend to everyone, that is the thing, right? That's the thing that would help everyone, and definitively has been shown to do it. And for what it's worth, even in our rate of aging, that's a way to change that rate of aging really, really quickly. If you go get that test with Dr. D and see your rate of aging is 1.05 or something, you can get that down really, really quickly just by doing some caloric restriction, eating less than you're intaking essentially. And so really easy ways to change that behavior and change your aging process.
Yeah. If you guys kind of see my makeup, I'm not a big fan of fasting. I'm 5'8" and I weigh 195 pounds. So when I train lots of days, twice a day, and oh man, the fasting thing sometimes like, uh, but it is something that I am very, very, very fond of. And I mean, and if you also look back into old civilizations and religions and so forth, it's not something that we just came up with this. It's old as time, So really, really cool intervention. And we kind of explained to you the two really strong ways this fasting helps by, again, increasing growth hormone levels and decreasing that mTOR intervention, that culprit guy that always shows up. Right? Okay, and then I guess to start wrapping it up, I did not. I just checked on the time now. I did not think we spoke this long, but also there's a few other things that and I guess we can wrap up a little bit with peptides and stem cells and just a few of these other hot topics coming up. I just did stem cells for the first time. I did it with Dr. Jim Pop in Costa Rica. Wow, I did get a little bit of a cytokine reaction. I was knocked out 2 days later, and I like where I had to take a nap in the afternoon and so forth. I because I trained jujitsu, I did an EMG and a nerve conduction study and so forth, and I really my C8T1 right here on my right side coming out of my neck. So that's a nerve from the brachial plexus, right? For those of you that are not so medically inclined, it's a nerve that comes down your arm. I mean, innervates the whole thing. Your top of your chest. I mean, I had muscle atrophy. Like it was crazy. Like it's just I'm like 80% there. And it really worked. It really worked for me. Doing the stem cells and then I do some peptides too for regenerative purposes, like the BPC 157, which that's a old school one, right? That more people know about, and thymosin beta, some GHK to help renew the tissue. That's what I did specifically for this. And I mean, it's pretty impressive. I'm about to do the EMG again with the nerve conduction study, which is not fun. If you guys don't know how that thing is, they shock you. It's like terrible. It's like you're getting tased. And the examiner is literally like cracking up. I mean, I'm like, this is funny. This is a funny job, but so yeah. But so I'm about to do that again to see how the results. But what are your thoughts, Ryan, on a little bit of on especially peptides, stem cells, and their intervention? I mean, their correlation with these
Yeah.
epigenetic clocks, and also one thing I want to tell you, actually, that I did yesterday. A little buddy side note: I did the Grail test, the cancer one.
Ooh,
Uh,
yeah,
that's whatever. Let's
yeah.
let's some good results. But for you, those of you guys that don't know, actually Ryan introduced me to this test. Is Grail. You could go to grail.com. It's a predictive cancer test. I mean, phenomenal work those guys are doing. They detect 50 cancers, of which 45 before we couldn't really even kind of test for. And I mean, and if that thing is positive, they will pair you with an oncologist and so forth. And really, really cool. So yeah, thanks Ryan for pointing it that way. And I'm going to do the test here. Everybody's like, do it first. So let's see how it goes with you. I'm like, but yeah, going back to the peptides and the stem cells. What are your thoughts? Some of your favorite peptides? Some of your have you done stem cells? If I can ask you that.
Yeah, so I haven't done stem cells yet. I almost certainly will, though. I think I'm not adverse to new types of treatments, and I believe in stem cells for sure. I think that I'm also probably even a bigger fan of the peptides. I think that the diversity and of different things you're able to do with those peptide related interventions, I think are great. I've been doing a lot of peptides as well. For a long time. Some of my favorites include the ones you mentioned, right? Things like the thymosin beta 4 are great for nerve repair. They're great for soft tissue and muscle recovery. Very big fans of those, especially if you're doing anything performance wise. You can even just take your delayed onset muscle soreness and cut it in half essentially with some of those products. But probably one of my favorite peptides is a mitochondrial peptide called SS31. This is not hyperbole when I say it, but one injection is the ATP equivalent of 6 months of daily endurance training exercise. And again, ATP is that sort of energy currency of your cell. And so if you can, as we age, our mitochondria become a little bit less efficient, and if you can restore those, you can restore a lot of sort of efficiency and energy production, which helps in a lot of different things like free radical reduction, even just in performance. And so the SS31 is one of those lesser known peptides, which I'm a very big fan of.
I have it in my refrigerator. Yeah, that's why my Max. I mean, I can't turn the camera, but we have a VO2 Max machine here, and I invite anybody to break my record. I still have the record here, and we have a lot of. No, but yeah, that's But with all honesty, I haven't used it yet, so I've not tried it. So I'm a big fan of someone like that kind of goes with the SS31 MOTS-c. I love the MOTS-c, mitochondrial C peptide, which there's a lot of connection between the Japanese, that live the longest in the blue zone. If you guys are, if you have not heard of blue zones, it's areas in the world where people live to there's more centenarians with a good life and health span, so they live with a good quality of life. And in Japan, which I believe is the first one, is Japan, Sardinia, Italy, Costa Rica, and Loma Linda, California, the Seventh-day Adventists in the United States. And now they say there's a fifth one. I believe it's Greece. So point is, the Japanese, they've done there's a phenotypic link between them having more MOTS-c and more longevity. And what it does, it increases the amount of the mitochondrial biogenesis, right? And that one actually, going back to the insulin mitigation, decreases insulin as well, right? By upregulating GLUT4 receptors in the muscle, right? And so if you have more mitochondria too, more energy. And then with more energy and then upregulating GLUT4 in the muscle, insulin mitigation, you're going to lose a little bit of weight. Nothing crazy, all right, women out there. Nothing like you're going to lose 20 pounds in 10 days. None of that. I use it a lot, for energy purposes and so forth. And I noticed, like, I do, pretty lean guy. Ryan's very lean as well, so I like MOTS-c a lot as well.
Love it too, and people always think we always talk about doing post-workout shakes and things of that nature, and the reason is because exercise upregulates that same GLUT4 receptor, right? It's the only thing that upregulates that GLUT4 receptor. So if you do post-workout protein, do MOTS-c too, because you're increasing those GLUT4 receptors, but you're not just doing it at the time of workout, right? You're doing it; it's an exercise mimetic, and so again, it's a product I'm a big fan of as well.
Yeah. So yeah, there's some pearls there, and guys, and this topic could go on forever and forever. We've been at it for 45 minutes. We're gonna start wrapping it up, but do consider. I know, and hopefully you guys aren't feeling too confused and so forth, because that's what was my goal in what we do, is to actually make this a lot easier to understand. So I always like to drop our philosophy here specifically at Biohacks, which is number one, remove the 4 R's. I call it, or now 5 R's. Remove what? Toxicity. Number two, replenish. Replenish what's missing in your body. Look at a micronutrient study. Look at the levels of vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, and so forth that your body may need. And on the removal side, going back to point number one, look at, for example, we use Cyrix Laboratories. We really like Cyrix to see exactly what we need to remove out of that person's life. Sometimes it's additive, sometimes it's chemical, sometimes it's heavy metals, parasites, food peptides that are getting in the way of this person's life, causing the leaky gut, et cetera, et cetera. And then three, replenish that gut flora, right? Where we get that gut back and functioning. So here we're big on GI maps and so forth. Four, recovery. Recovery is huge. If you're not sleeping properly, et cetera, and that brings to mind another peptide I really like, DSIP, delta sleep inducing peptide. Love that darn peptide. Works very, very well. And then also there, what we do is neurotransmitter mapping, where we look at the levels of actually serotonin, dopamine, PEA, norepinephrine, epinephrine, GABA, glutamate in your brain, right? And to see how you're thinking, if you're anxious, if you're depressed, et cetera. So we look at that, and how are you recovering? And then ultimately, and this is kind of like the EBITDA of the whole calculation. This is our drum roll here at Biohacks, is what's your epigenetic age when you came in, and now as we're a few months down the line or years down the line, how's that epigenetic age, which we call re-exist. So remove, replenish, reinoculate, recover, and re-exist. That hopefully there we are able to reset your epigenetic clock a bit, and you're able to re-exist, right? That's what we say here. So keeping it simple, just that's our strategy here to try to help everybody out. And once we've been successful, and once we do these things, we're able to see these epigenetic clocks reverse a bit. And Ryan, I just have to thank you for just being such an innovator, a pioneer, and helping us guys. Ryan not only helps me, but he helps the whole industry to be bigger, better, faster, stronger, as I like to say.
Totally.
So,
No, thanks for having me, and hopefully we'll be on to do it again one time. But appreciate it, and hopefully for anyone listening, you'll start looking at your age.
oh yeah, look at your real age. Look at your real age. How old are you really? And Ryan, I'm going to finish actually, because these people probably think, how old are these guys?
Totally.
Mine is not that good actually. I really beat myself up over the years. I'm actually right now kind of 101, and I'm still working on bringing this thing down. So,
Yeah.
I didn't go to medical school. I didn't know any of this. It was sleeping was a luxury kind of deal. I've never, I've always had a very clean diet, and till this day, no judgment here, but I've never tasted alcohol. Like I've always been really, no processed sugars. But the sleep factor really killed me. Really, really, really. I mean, I would do all-nighters like for 2 days, 3 days. That messed me up hard. So I just I'm working on it myself.
Same way, I first time I tested, I was surprised, which again, it goes to, I think, tell you that it's not always what you think, right? You don't know until you test. And so I was around 2 years accelerated, and now over the course of 1.5 years, I finally got it down to being younger biologically than I am chronologically. And so again, you can take it into your hands, you can make changes, find out what works for you. So that's, again, it's in your control.
There you go. And we'll wrap up with that. It's in your control, guys. Thanks for watching today. I hope you guys got some good value out of this. And Ryan, again, thanks. I appreciate you guys.
Yeah. Perfect. Thanks.
All right. See you guys.